I don't just talk about other people's stuff, I also make my own. Books in particular. To date, I have 4 books you can check out on Amazon. Operation Red Dragon: The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, Occult Mafia, Emerald of Maddox City, and the short story collection Assorted Absurdities, Tales of Kaiju Punk and Other Genres. Hop on down to the description for Amazon links to all 4 books. Enjoy whichever ones you read, and enjoy the video.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm the Omni viewer, and I probably should have made this video closer to when Godzilla Singular Point made its Netflix debut, but I've been spending more time thinking about it so I can make sure I've really got my argument straight here, because there is another thing I want to talk about with that series that has really bothered me, and that is how the different evolutionary forms of Godzilla in that series really bother me. Not because it's a shallow reference to Shin Godzilla, but because they blatantly use the designs for Titanosaurus, Varan, and Gorosaurus respectively in order to get that evolutionary part going. And it feels like that is just an insult, because a lot of us were looking forward to seeing these monsters make a comeback, and all of a sudden that's how they did it. Though, let me back up just a moment. I still recall that at first, when that trailer dropped for Singular Point and it was showing us various different things that made the series actually look like it could really be good, or at least better than the Polygon trilogy, one of the first things that people noticed was a shot of a giant red creature leaping out of the water, and a lot of us thought, oh, that must be a redesigned Titanosaurus. Then, of course, the figures for the Bandai Movie Monster series figure were released, and they labeled the creature not as a redesigned Titanosaurus, but as Godzilla Aquatilus. So this was some form of Godzilla, apparently? It threw a lot of us for a loop because we were convinced this had to be Titanosaurus. Yes, he looked different, but then again so did Rodan and Anguirus and Godzilla himself. It wasn't that much of a stretch to think that they would redesign Titanosaurus to look like something more suited for the water than the original suit. Not that the original design was bad, I love that original design. But for something like the anime, where they weren't constrained by the human proportions they had to build a suit around, a design like that does feel like something they would have done with the character. So why were they calling it Godzilla Aquatilus? While the rest of us were scratching our heads in confusion, a small but vocal group emerged that said, "Ha, you're all a bunch of idiots. You only thought this thing was Titanosaurus because it was red. There's no other way you would have thought that." And that's just patently false. Yes, the red was an indicator, but even if we switched the image to black and white, we still are left with that very distinctive head, which has a long snout, those little antennae-like feelers, and the mohawk fin, features which are clearly associated with Titanosaurus's head. Different, yes, but still recognizable as such. Combine that with the color and the flipper at the end of the tail, it's obvious what this thing was supposed to be, or at least it should have been. But people still proclaim that it was only the color that made us think it was supposed to be Titanosaurus when it was so clearly just a new Godzilla design. And then Godzilla Amphibia was revealed, and those people got real quiet very quickly because it was pretty obvious that Amphibia was Varan. There was just no getting around it. There's no way you can blame it just on the color. That is a redesigned Varan, but with some Godzilla spines on there, so now apparently it's Godzilla Amphibia. And then, of course, Godzilla Terrestris came along, and I still have a hard time seeing what resemblance this thing is supposed to have to Gorosaurus. Having had more time to look at the design, I'm guessing it's the skin texture and those short little spikes, not counting the Godzilla spines on his back, that are supposed to be the Gorosaurus features. But otherwise, I mean, man, it just looks like early concept art. A lot of people were saying it was the color that indicated it was Gorosaurus, but Gorosaurus is not bright teal. Anyway, that was the claim, so we're just going to go with it. We've got Titanosaurus, Varan, and Gorosaurus, who, after years of absence from the movies, were finally going to make their big comeback in a form of actual moving entertainment, because they'd been in the IDW comics, but This was an official production where they would actually be in motion with brand new designs, but now we were being told they weren't actually those characters anymore. They were just early stages of Godzilla, leading up to Godzilla Ultima. Now, there are those who say that this was actually a fun, respectful way to bring them back. I disagree wholeheartedly. I do not think this was respectful. I think it was an insult. I have thought it was an insult from the get-go, and I'm going to use this video to explain why. See, the reason I find this disrespectful is because Gorosaurus, Titanosaurus, and Varan are characters. I have said so many times at this point that what really makes kaiju interesting is the fact that they have personalities. They look cool, sure, but they're actual characters because they're being played by people and they're playing active roles in the stories they appear in. Naturally, they are going to be characters. It's very different from American giant monster movies of the era that just used actual bugs in scaled city sets and called it a day. No, there were people playing these things, and actors play characters whether they are just wearing regular clothes or are covered head to toe in a dinosaur costume. Varan, Gorosaurus, and Titanosaurus were characters. However, I would occasionally get pushback when I brought that up with certain people because they said they didn't really have much in the way of personalities. These creatures were just interesting designs, and good designs, sure, but to call them proper characters wasn't really that accurate, because they've had so few appearances, they've barely had time to develop personalities at all. Again, I disagree, but this isn't really a matter of opinion in this case. The whole whether or not it's disrespectful thing, maybe that is just a matter of opinion and I'm expressing my own. But as far as the monsters being characters, that's not an opinion, that's a fact. Now yes, we do visually recognize them by their designs, but it can't just be their designs that we're drawn into, because anyone can make a design and not have it move you. A lot of modern art is just designs where people paint a square and then paint another different colored square inside of it and call it a painting. And that's a design, sure, but does it really move you the same way as a classic Renaissance painting? Well, it doesn't move me the same way. And that's because the Renaissance painting has other layers to it. There's deeper meaning. You can pick details out of it. Whereas the square within a square is just a square within a square. Sure, there might have been some effort made to mix the colors and make sure it was symmetrical, but it's still just concentric squares. When it comes to the kaiju, though, I know it can't just be the designs that draw people to them, and that's because of Gorosaurus. Last time I was at G-Fest, it was the year when Bandai's Movie Monster series Gorosaurus figure had just been released. So I was with a friend who likes Godzilla but isn't as deep into it as I am, and we were looking around to see which tables had the Gorosaurus figure and what the prices were. Comparison, you know. The cheapest we ever saw that figure was $60, and it only went up from there. That's pretty pricey. I mean, you hop on Amazon and you look up these figures, these vinyl figures, you'll find they generally fall into either the $15 to $25 range. But $60 at the cheapest? Eventually, as the weekend wore on, this friend of mine asked the burning question, given all these weird and crazy and creative kaiju designs that you can get figures of, where do these people get off charging that much for what amounts to a generic theropod dinosaur? And while I agreed that the price was ridiculous, I did have an answer at the ready. First of all, it was because the figure was the first of its kind, really. Gorosaurus figures are incredibly rare. But the other reason was because of Gorosaurus's personality and the role that he plays. You see, the thing is, Gorosaurus, and I'm saying this as a fan of the character, does not have all that interesting of a design. It's a good dinosaur design, but as a kaiju design, the only thing that stands out about it is that nothing stands out about it. Put him next to Gigan or King Ghidorah or Megalon or Destroya or Mogera, he doesn't really look that interesting. And even if you think that comparison isn't fair and he should be only compared to the Saurian kaiju, he still doesn't have anything that really sticks out about him. He doesn't have something like Godzilla's dorsal plates, or Anguirus' spiky carapace, or Baragon's floppy ears or something. He's just a retro dinosaur. Even his introductory film, King Kong Escapes, utilizes him as basically just retreading the dinosaur fight from the original King Kong. So what is it that draws us to Gorosaurus and makes him such a cult favorite among the kaiju? It's because of the role he played in Destroy All Monsters, a role that was originally meant to be for Baragon, but the suit had become almost unusable due to being used for roughly 1/4 of the kaiju in Ultraman. So Gorosaurus had to fill that role. Had it been Baragon, I'm sure he would have been jumping and burrowing underground and coordinating beam attacks with Godzilla, but Gorosaurus doesn't have any of those powers. What he does have, however, is intelligence. We see him strategizing a battle plan with Godzilla when Ghidorah lands and starts attacking. And while Ghidorah is dealing with the other monsters, Gorosaurus manages to sneak around behind him and deliver that powerful kangaroo kick that lays him out flat. Gorosaurus, despite being a normal dinosaur, is one of the few kaiju that can say he knocked down King Ghidorah. That is really impressive, and he did that just as a normal dinosaur. So even though his design is not really that impressive, again, not a bad design, but not a very impressive design by the standards of kaiju, it's his character that draws us to him. Okay, but maybe you're gonna tell me that all I described were just certain traits, but I didn't really describe a personality. So let's see if I can describe a personality, not just for him, but for all of the monsters in question. And I'm going to start with Godzilla so we can say for certain whether or not any of them are indistinguishable in terms of personality. So, what is Godzilla's personality like? Well, it's hard to pin it down exactly because he's played so many different roles, whether he's been good or evil or anything in between. But there are some traits that remain constant throughout, most prominent of which, if I had to boil Godzilla down to his very essence, I would say is that he is the ultimate fighter. He is determination incarnate. When he sees an enemy, whatever that enemy may be, he advances, never retreats. He fights until somebody gets knocked out of the ring. And he will not make it easy for him to get knocked out first. That is the most basic idea of Godzilla's personality. Again, it can vary depending on the role he's playing. If he is a heroic figure, that determination is fueled towards a sort of sense of duty to fight and protect. If he is evil, he is more driven by a sense of revenge and wanting to just obliterate or maybe even just eat something. But whatever the case, he is always the juggernaut that moves forward and never retreats. So, we can agree that is Godzilla's baseline personality at least, with variations that apply. So what about the others? Since I spent so much time on Gorosaurus just now, how would I describe his personality? I would almost liken him to a character like Tarzan. Primitive, simple, but smart. And he knows how to fight. So he may not be a brilliant tactician or anything, but he knows how to get an advantage. And otherwise, he's just a very simple law of the jungle kind of creature, because at the end of the day, he is still a dinosaur. Alright, that's not really the same as Godzilla's personality, but what about Varan? Varan was still from those early days after all. Well, Varan actually is very easy. If I were to classify Varan, I would use just one word. Hermit. That's what a Varan is. He just likes to stay to himself. And you might think, well, wait a minute, doesn't Godzilla like to stay to himself too? Yes, but here's the main difference. Varan really doesn't want to fight. In his debut movie, Varan the Unbelievable, he's been living in mainland Japan, on the actual mainland islands, for who knows how long, just chilling in his saltwater lake. He only comes out if people trespass on what he perceives to be his territory. And when that happens, he'll come out, he'll throw a tantrum to make sure people learn their lesson not to do it again, and then he goes right back. Because he doesn't really want trouble. He'll make it for you only if you make it for him first. When the JSDF comes and tries killing him, what does he do? He tries fighting back, sure, but when it becomes clear that the place is lost, he leaves. He takes off flying and lands in the ocean, where again, he's just minding his own business, but the army keeps coming for him and keeps trying to kill him. So after a while, he's basically like, fine, you want to fight? You gotta fight. And that's when he finally comes to the mainland. Varan just wants his peace and quiet. He is not looking for a fight, but if forced into it, he'll finally give you one. As for Titanosaurus, he might be the most tragic of them all, because it's described in Dr. Mifune's notes that he is a naturally gentle creature, very peaceful, very serene, probably would not fight under any circumstances, and yet he's under mind control that's forcing him to be destructive. He's essentially been brainwashed. This duality is actually on display at the end of his first fight with Godzilla, where they're battling each other because Titanosaurus is being told to fight, but then the technology fritzes out, and then all of a sudden Titanosaurus just stops, turns around, and walks away, and Godzilla's just like, what the? Okay, I win! Victory roar! Because Titanosaurus is gentle. He's not there to fight. He doesn't want to fight. But the mind control is still in effect, and that makes the ending just all the more tragic. Throughout the finale, Titanosaurus is just getting tortured by that radar weapon that humanity developed. And yeah, it's necessary at that point, but after the mind control is broken and the aliens are destroyed, Godzilla still goes after him even though he's not under mind control anymore. For all we know, he might not even realize what just happened. But Godzilla has no reason to think that Titanosaurus is not still an enemy because he has no idea about that mind control stuff. All he knows is that Titanosaurus nearly killed him a few minutes ago, and he must pay. So when you see him get blasted and fall back into the water, presumably dead, man, that is heartbreaking. All right, there you have it. I have firmly established that all three of these monsters are not just interesting designs. They are in fact proper characters with personalities that are distinct from Godzilla. And that is why I think the way they were used in Singular Point is not respectful, but rather insulting. Because it's saying that these creatures, with their own designs and their own personalities, are all just minor variations on the theme that is Godzilla. Which is not true. Think of it this way. You may have heard that there's going to be another Batman reboot soon. Because, you know, it's been a couple of years. It's time to reboot Batman again. Reset your watches. So, let's suppose, just hypothetically, because I have no idea what this movie's going to be like, but just for the sake of argument, let's say the movie includes a little montage scene in which Batman is trying to figure out how he's going to fight crime before landing on the Bat motif we all know him for. So he tries out different costumes. His first costume is a sort of trench coat and fedora idea with a gas mask and a gas gun. It kind of works, but it's hard to see in that thing. So he keeps the hat and coat, but develops a new mask that makes it look like he has no face at all. Not bad, but not really intimidating either. So then he goes for something more like a Robin Hood motif. Bright green outfit with a bunch of trick arrows. But that's not really what he's going for. He dons an all-black costume with a cat mask. Closer, he likes the stealth, but it's still not quite what he's looking for, until he settles finally on the Bat idea and becomes Batman. Now, any DC fan can tell you that I just described the costumes in order for Sandman, Question, Green Arrow, and Black Cat. All other superheroes who, like Batman, don't have superpowers, but who have their own distinct personalities. Yes, I know Green Arrow started as a Batman knockoff, but that's not what he is now. The point is, we have four very distinct characters who each have their own fans. I happen to be a big fan of the Question Sandman. I like their taste in hats, what can I say? But these four characters are characters that people would probably love to see in the movies. Arrow got a series, sure, but we're looking for them to be in the big movies, you know. But what if they were only just their costumes being tried on by Bruce Wayne, and James Gunn revealed that that was it? That was the closest we were ever going to get to seeing them in this new spate of movies. there'd be an uproar. DC fans would be rioting. They would hate that these characters, who have their own long and storied histories and their own rogues galleries and their own unique stories and outlooks and characterizations and interpersonal relationships, had just been reduced to costume choices. That's the same thing that happened in Singular Point. Titanosaurus, Varan, and Gorosaurus were determined to be nothing but designs, and those designs, if you just slapped some silver maple leaf spines on the backs, were just going to be new variations of Godzilla. That, as far as I'm concerned, is an insult. Now, I don't know if this was a decision made specifically by the creative team early on, or if it was something they did at the last minute because Toho demanded that they have Shin Godzilla-style evolution. If I had to guess, I would actually think it was the latter, because the way those dorsal plates are put onto some of those designs is so incongruous with everything else that it feels like it had to have been done at the last minute. But I really don't know. All I know is that these three distinct kaiju, with their own designs and their own personalities, were reduced to nothing more than proto-Godzillas for this anime, and I just cannot accept that. Had I been in charge, I would have kept them as their own things. I would have had them be their own versions of Titanosaurus, Varan, and Gorosaurus. Maybe having them alongside Godzilla or opposing Godzilla or something. But I wouldn't have used them like that. Well, anyway, I just have been sitting on that for a while and had to get it out there. I don't know how many of you might agree or how many of you think I'm just overreacting and overanalyzing this, but whatever the case, thanks for hearing me out all the same. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off.
Congratulations, you reached the end. If you enjoyed this video, you might want to consider supporting us on Patreon. Of course, the other way to support us is to go to Amazon and check out our books: Operation Red Dragon, The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, The Occult Mafia, Emerald of Maddox City, and Assorted Absurdities, Tales of Kaiju Punk and Other Genres. Also check the description for links to DeviantArt and other platforms we operate. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.